Today I'll be talking about something that makes me pretty sad, to be honest. I want to talk about this research paper that I read a few years ago now, because it's been on my mind since that time, and I've been thinking about it a lot, and I kind of want to talk about it here. So I will put it up on the screen. People are noticing that humankind's connection to nature is decaying. We just don't have the same appreciation for nature. We're not as embedded in nature. We have become more and more detracted from our own experience with the natural world. This has been talked about for a very long time. So basically what they did is they tracked cultural products. So these are like productions of media, like books, songs, basically these cultural productions, artistic representations of life. Right? That's what songs, that's what books, that's what all these things are. They are expressions of our way of living. Basically, they looked at these productions, these cultural products, made from the early 1900s all the way through now, basically 100 years. And they used certain models to assess where is the frequency of certain words. They chose to focus on nature-based words. These are words related to trees and flowers and basically the natural world. So, creek, lupine, rose, all of these things that are pieces of our natural environment that used to occupy a lot of our psyche, that used to be a central focus of a lot of our thoughts. I mean, obviously, that's where our food comes from. That's where our shelter comes from. Everything that we are, everything that we have comes from Mother Nature. And the more that we forget that, the more that we become disconnected from nature, the more we suffer. So I've been thinking about this research paper and I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. And before I get into kind of my thoughts on it, I just want to lay out some caveats. So first of all, when we look at research, we should be very careful about the methods. We should understand what is the intention. Is there any sort of like statistical finagling going on in the background, any p-hacking? And these are these sort of like higher level statistical stuff, but it's important, especially if you've been trained to read these research papers, like my grad school did for me. It's important to be able to assess these things with a fair mind so we're not jumping and making too many conclusions with one research paper. So let's just lay out some of the things that impact the methodology that might impact the results, or at least we should keep in mind when we think about this research paper. First of which is that they basically, to make this consistent, they had to narrow it down to a set of words. So they chose 186 nature-based words, a lot of tree stuff, a lot of flowers, creeks, water, stuff like this. In the natural world. They picked 186, and then they also only pulled from popular works. So that's another maybe limitation, although I think it is a good representation of, I guess, what most people are experiencing, the great mean or the average. But they did only pull from popular works. So that's not to say that just because something's popular, it represents everyone's experience. Like the songs especially, they pulled from the top 100. And these are only songs or books, fiction, produced by Anglophone writers and authors and artists. So this might not be true for Africa, for Asia, for the Middle East. It just might not be the case for them. This really is only English-speaking countries. Now, I think you can probably fairly generalize to some degree, but the world doesn't develop at all the same pace. Cultures are very different. This isn't going to be universally applicable. Let's just say that. So this will mostly apply to English-speaking Western countries. Now that we have those caveats out of the way, let's look at some of the statistics. So I'm going to pull up two graphs here. One is going to be the graph of the overall words that they found and the frequency that they tracked over the years. Now, they noticed a huge, basically cutoff line at 1950, and you'll see this, where really everything started to change. They noticed that nature-based words were increasing slightly up until then, and that general complexity in the language that artists were using generally was increasing in complexity until about 1950. After that, things change. You'll see in this graph that things start to go down. There become less of these words. And then I looked further and then they had this other graph. And this goes more specifically, you'll see about what are these specific categories that dropped. And you'll see that it wasn't universal. Some dropped off quicker than others. But there's still this general downtrend in nature-based words being part of our cultural output. And that concerns me a lot. But I want to talk about it a little bit further. So let me just give you a quote from the author of this paper. So there were two authors. What they say is that authors, artists, they know this. They've already tapped into this. And so they pull from a few sources where people have talked about this disconnection from nature, and they quote them here. So one thing they say is that one writer introduced the term nature deficit disorder to describe the growing distance between children and the natural world, and wondered, as the care of nature increasingly becomes an intellectual concept severed from the joyful experience of the outdoors, you have to wonder, where will future environmentalists come from? That, I think, is a really poignant quote, and I think it's a great question to ask. If we are, as adults, becoming less and less connected with nature, and generationally this is happening, that severance, that detachment from nature will only worsen. It takes a lot to undo some of these very powerful cultural movements. And I have to say, although I'm kind of iffy on, a lot of these clinical terms and these disorders or whatever, I really like the cheeky use of nature deficit disorder. I think that's just a great term in general, because it describes exactly what's going on. We have a deficit, a cultural, a environmental. I mean, look around. I'm in a downtown area. I'm surrounded by buildings. I can't see anything, well, outside of my office, I can't see anything green from where I'm sitting. And that's just fundamentally different from where things were 100 years ago, even. So that natural severance is happening already. It's happening to all of us all the time, whether it's happening in our thoughts, in our natural environment, in our soul or our spirit, if you believe in that thing. And really, there is a strong connection between time spent in nature and all of these sort of individual skills that build up this wider umbrella of executive function that relates to things like ADHD. So nature deficit disorder is very true. If you don't get enough nature in your experience, you're going to feel more stressed, you're going to feel more frenetic, you're going to feel less calm, you're going to feel less connected, not only to nature, but to your humanity. And so as they sort of tracked these statistics as time went on, they noticed that nature words were disappearing. They also noticed that human-based words, things about human-made things like bed or bowl or building, those sort of things were increasing. Now, I looked at some of these numbers and I noticed that it wasn't a full replacement, right? So the nature words were going away and there was an increase in human-based words. So I got a little curious and I looked into this further, and I know that the video title is only about one research paper, but I have two more to bring up. Sue me. So the other research papers, one titled "Song Lyrics Have Become Simpler and More Repetitive Over the Last 5 Decades," and another one titled "Modeling Nature Connectedness with Environmental Systems, Human Nature Relationships from 1800 to 2020 and Beyond." And these are two very interesting papers. And that's where I found those missing numbers, was in this first one about song lyrics becoming more repetitive and less complex. We actually are losing complexity in our songs in general. So it's not just that nature words are disappearing, but the broad spectrum of language is disappearing from our cultural products. There's not as much variation in our music and in our books in terms of the words that are used. So there's almost like a reduction in the intellectualism in cultural products. So songs have become simpler and more repetitive just in general. So that's part of this trend as well, I would imagine, is if you're just having less complexity, you're going to have less natural words. You're going to have less words in general. So that's a part of it. And the other piece, this was a very interesting paper. It's a little dense for me. I'm still kind of chewing on it a little bit. But they make some really interesting assessments and analyses. And although I'm not really that big into all these really dense statistical analyses, I kind of find them a bit loaded and not always the most useful. They do say some interesting stuff here. So I'll just repeat this for you. They estimate, based on their models and their analysis, they estimate that this disconnection from nature will continue well through 2050. And what they say is actually, even if there is significant change in urban planning, in the way that resources are managed from larger governments and in local politics, they say even if there's significant change, this trend is already on its way. These things cannot be undone. These new generations are coming up with a less of appreciation for nature that will take a lot to undo. And our environments are not getting more naturalized. While some municipalities might be working hard to keep natural spaces, development is happening all the time in America, and green space is disappearing rapidly. So either way, it doesn't seem like this is really heading in the right direction. And that scares me too. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, isn't this just the march of time? And yeah, it is. Things do change. I don't expect us to be, hanging out in the savannas forever. It is natural that we build cities, that we build infrastructure, that we have to, in some ways, destroy parts of the natural world to develop an urban, developed world with medicine and advancements in technology and all of this stuff. I do understand that. And I appreciate that. That's part of life. I wouldn't try to push that back. But I do think that sometimes when we are making movements in culture, we can be moving in the wrong way, or at least in a way that's kind of damaging to our future. And this is one of them. To me, the most important one of them, because I don't take on many titles, but environmentalist is one of the few that I will wear proudly. Because look, Mother Nature gives us everything. Without it, we are nothing. We cannot survive. And if we don't appreciate that, if we don't give back as much as we take from Mother Nature, that is going to be a problem. It already is. We're seeing it all the time. Environmental toxins on the rise, corporations destroying our natural environment, and there's no recourse. We don't punish them. We don't put anyone in jail. We make them pay some fine and clean it up. I live in Kalamazoo, and we had one of the largest inland oil spills that they say they've cleaned up. But I go to the Kalamazoo River. It's not clean. And there are still spills. There was a spill there a couple months ago. It's constant. We cannot protect our natural environment if we don't have a government, local and federal, that is willing to push back on the people that are harming the environment. But enough with that lecture. I just want to say that this repetitive disconnection from nature is harmful to our mental health. I mean, that's my bag. I'm not necessarily a politician, although I'm very interested in politics. I am a mental health worker. And so I see this every day. I see my clients come in and they can't appreciate a flower on the side of the road. They just drive past. They don't see the immense beauty in a flower cracking up from the sidewalk, that it can even do that. I mean, it's beautiful. It's stunning that nature fights to live in every corner of reality. And they're not going on walks. They don't sit by a creek. They don't do their processing in a natural environment. They are disconnected from that. And I see it harm them all the time. And it harms them in a sort of subtle, nefarious way. And that's because we're not talking about it. As a culture, we're not talking about nature in this way. We're not talking about it as inherent to our spiritual, physical, mental health. We see it as something separate, that animals are over there, humans are over here, and it's a different thing. And the more that we become drawn away from our human experience and our animal experience, we become less true. We become less of ourselves. We lose that shine that's inherent to being a human, being an animal, just going out, embracing the natural world and observing it. So in general, we're seeing worse mental health, we're seeing worse education, we're seeing less community. Thankfully, I do live in a place where parks are well maintained. And so I see people in the park all the time. They're doing Tai Chi, they're doing yoga, they're meeting, they're hanging out, they're studying. That is important. We need to be in those areas, not stuck in these buildings all the time. Although, I'm in Michigan, it gets cold. I understand the need for buildings, trust me. But we are just becoming more detached. And this is an issue. So my feelings on it, as someone who cares deeply about nature and who was healed by nature, when I went through my process and had to overcome some of the mental things that I was dealing with, I did that in nature. And I don't think I could have done it not in nature. I got counseling, I did the work, but it was Mother Nature that healed me. It was reconnecting to my roots, understanding myself, not just as some intellectual human, but as an animal. That was important. And so I just want that for everyone. I want that for my clients. I want that for anyone walking down the street. I want to undo this disconnection. And so seeing these research papers, it just makes me a little sad, very sad, I'll admit. And I just wanted to kind of put this out there. So maybe if you've been thinking you're a bit disconnected from nature, that you can kind of take this in and maybe make some different choices. And here's where I get to the part where we talk about change. I don't like to make these videos if I don't offer you something that you can take with you and maybe make a difference in your life or the lives of people around you. So here are the action items. First of all, this is what I like. I mean, the kids are already kind of picking up on this: touch grass. I think it's nice that, if you really pay attention to kids, a lot of times they will have a lot of really silly, meme stuff going on and all that. But every once in a while, something will arise in the cultural zeitgeist, particularly in the youth, that really, really captures an anxiety that maybe not all of them are tapped into, but they know is impacting them. And to me, the rise of this concept of touch grass is a great example of that. These kids know they're disconnected. They know that they're not engaged in the natural world. They know that it's harming them. So they invented this, edict, this insult or roast or whatever it is, to tell someone to go touch grass. Get out of this echo chamber, get out of the internet, get out of all this stuff that is filling up your brain with negativity and chaos. Reconnect with nature. Let the ego wash away. That's the most important thing about nature, is that every time you enter nature and you appreciate the vastness of it and the greatness and the complexity of it, you shrink down a little bit in a good way. Your ego shrinks. That's the beauty of nature. To connect with the world around you and become less focused on yourself, to feel a little smaller, and to feel that you're just a piece of this. The world doesn't revolve around you, that you actually have a job and a responsibility to help keep the world revolving, to keep these things alive and healthy. And when we opt out of that responsibility, things go wrong. Not just for our societies, but they go wrong in our own head and in our own body. And it's seen and it's felt. So I just want you to pay attention to that. Go touch grass if you need to, and just try to embed yourself in nature a little bit more. The other thing is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you've got to involve yourself in local politics. Although the federal government does a lot and it moves mountains in ways when it wants to, although it hasn't done too much of that lately, it has the capacity to do a lot of change. But that capacity is not always realized. Where most of the change is happening to your natural world, to the ecology that you exist in, the very specific local ecology, okay? The guy in California is not going to have the same ecology as the guy down the street from you. That's really important to know, and that's why community is so central, because that community that's close to you, that's your ecology. And while everyone's ecology is important, you can really only be responsible for yours. So being involved in local politics, getting engaged, maybe trying to push them to redevelop gray sites, to use empty lots, to use space that's already developed, not to tear down extra green space, not to, clear cut forests so we can put up an amusement park. So getting involved in city planning is very important. And the last one, the legality of this is going to depend on where you are. And so I will say, don't blame me. I didn't tell you to do anything specific, but there's this concept called guerrilla gardening, and I like it a lot. And that's where you basically buy or collect seeds of, please, native only species, and you spread them around your local environment. So if there's some planters in front of a building and they've got nothing in there, they just haven't replaced them with flowers this year, throw some seeds in there. If you're walking down the median of the road and there's some dirt, throw some seeds in there. In grass plains, throw some seeds in there. People will make these like clay balls with a bunch of seeds in them. You kind of just toss it into a field. When it rains, it comes out. That will seed that environment with natives, that will support pollinators, that will add variation. I mean, a lot of the native species, at least around me, have beautiful flowers if you just take the time to notice them. So spreading native species in a sort of like guerrilla tactic sort of way is also a way that you can directly impact your native environment and improve it. It just will. And maybe the more that we do this, the more that we enrich our natural environment, the more that we can get the people around us to appreciate it in the same way. And you can lead that charge. I oftentimes pull invasive species from my local parks or nature ways, and whether it's legal or not, I don't care, because I am doing something right for the environment. And I'm replacing them with native species that hopefully will not get run over by invasives. And some of you are probably asking, like, well, what's a native species? I don't even know what specifically you're talking about. Just go and educate yourself. I guarantee in your city there are going to be programs and groups based on native gardening. There's so many in my area. And so just get involved, get engaged, try to bolster your natural environment rather than be part of what's tearing it down. I know this wasn't the most uplifting or even helpful or actionable video I've ever made, but it was important to me, and I appreciate you for watching. If you have any questions, if you want any guides or other creators that are really good at teaching about your natural ecology, I definitely would say go for a local creator. Because, like I said, your ecology is local, so you should want to tap into people who are engaged with your local ecology. Not necessarily following someone from California if you're in Michigan. That might not be the most helpful in terms of learning what's native and how your environment works. So just get educated, get involved. Things will come naturally. You will learn more, you will appreciate more, and you will start to tune in more to your environment, and that will help you be more in the moment. And that's where happiness is. It's in the moment. It doesn't exist in yesterday, it doesn't exist in tomorrow. It only exists now. And nature can help you feel that. It can help you tune into that. You just got to take the time to appreciate it. Thanks for watching.